Hi, everyone. I'm really looking forward to talking to you all today about direct-to-patient trials, focusing on the challenges as well as the technology solutions. A little bit about myself. I'm Heather DiFrusicia. I'm Associate Director of RTSM, IWRS at Axiom Real-Time Metrics. And what does that mean? My focus is on the randomization and trial supply or inventory management activities. And of course, there's the technology as well as the team, and we'll touch on some of that as we go through our presentation today. So a little bit about Axiom as well. So we do have our proprietary software, our Fusion eClinical suite. And of course, we started out on the EDC and data management and randomization and continued with the inventory management, adding in CTMS and all of the ePro related activities. Some of those we'll touch on today as well. So let's start just a little bit about the direct-to-patient trial. So what is that? Direct-to-patient also can be referred to as decentralized, remote, or virtual trials. And it's really looking at the study design and including either some or all aspects of that trial, having them conducted at somewhere other than the kind of usual investigator site. This is often used or can be used for rare diseases where there's very specific academic institutions and locations where they really focus on those diseases and being able to support them. And then also when we're looking at scenarios where subjects have limited mobility or reduced mobility due to illness. Some highlights about this type of model is, of course, the big one is decreasing travel. So because you have some or no clinic visits, then that really helps when it comes to recruitment and retention, as it means that we have more accessibility. We're taking away some of those roadblocks relating to kind of physical distance, as well as restrictions for scheduling around working care commitments. This also means that if you have more remote visits, then right now when we're experiencing kind of changing restrictions relating to COVID-19, then that decreases the impact to the trial as you're already set up for those remote activities. Another benefit is the ability to have continuous or more frequent data, and that's coming in through wearables as well as patient-reported outcomes. Another aspect, especially when we're talking about some of our COVID studies, are that patients can remain in quarantine. So that means we're decreasing the potential for transmission of infectious diseases. So when we're talking about implementing this, it's really a big takeaway is that it's not new, and we really want to kind of simplify it and break it down. So what are our key challenges? They're really focused on IP dispensing, patient monitoring, patient data, as well as the study oversight as a whole. And how do we solve that? Of course, with technology. And so let's break each of those down. So starting with IP dispensing. So how are we getting the drug or investigative product to the subject? So of course there's logistics, there's also blinding requirements because we're talking about patient identifying information or PHI. While we need to get the inventory to the subject, we also need to get it back as part of that full accountability. So how do we do that? We can do that through direct-to-patient shipments. Why are we doing this? It's really to prevent and reduce the need for those in-clinic visits. Another option, of course, you can manage it with the visit dispensing schedule and kind of having less on-site visits. But what that means is that longer periods of time between visits and therefore larger quantities of that investigational product going out to the subjects. Another aspect can also be temperature concerns. When they're traveling with the product, especially if there's a winter storm or a high temperature warning, then you can have impacts to the IP as well. There's a couple different ways to handle this under that direct-to-patient bucket, and that can be kind of a modified version of the standard shipment process, which is the depot is shipping to the site, and then the site can then either courier or hand carry to the subject's home. Another option, which is the one we're going to be talking a little bit more about today, is the depot to patient. So it's going directly from the depot to that patient's home. So what does that look like? What does that workflow look like? And what are some key considerations when looking at direct to patient? So of course, at the beginning, one of those initial steps is the subject confirming that they're okay with receiving the drug at home, and we need to capture their shipping address details. And of course, as I noted earlier, that's a flag right away because this is considered protected health information, or PHI, and so there's blinding requirements and level of encryption as applicable required. From there, you need to confirm the subject's eligibility and complete the study assessment. So the subject will be enrolled and or randomized, so ensuring that the subject is eligible to receive the treatment. And then of course from there, we have that initial shipment. And one thing that we like to consider is kind of making sure that we're balancing the overall study information and oversight. So we can take an approach of a blinded notification to kind of general sponsor level, as well as unblinded, of course, which is the one containing the shipment details going to the depot. From there, the depot is going to process and ship the IP, and then the subject's going to physically receive that shipment. They're going to confirm receipt, as well as any use or return details. And this process of the requests all the way through the subject receipt and use or return, that's going to repeat itself based on your dispensing schedule. If the subject drops some of their pills down the toilet, maybe you might need to do a replacement shipment in the interim. And then, of course, that needs to continue until the study is complete or there's any early termination. Another study data challenge that we noted is patient monitoring. So when we're talking about the patient data, there's the opportunity for ongoing PRO collection, as well as some challenges around the home healthcare visit support. So the solution here is ePro eDiary, ePro questionnaires, as well as eSource, and it's kind of divided into two buckets. We have the patient side for patient engagement, so making sure there's that continuous communication, even though they're not face-to-face, as well as monitoring for compliance and safety. So is the patient taking their medication as expected? Did they complete their validated questionnaires? Any other check-ins between the sites and the subjects? And they can be at scheduled intervals, and if not completed as expected, can trigger notifications as well as maybe a phone call from the site. For eSource, that's really focused on the home healthcare workers. So when they're at the patient's home, they can complete source data entry, and that prevents the need for kind of documenting details on paper and having to get that to the site and or transcribe at a later date. So a little bit more about the ePro side. So one thing we noticed that there's different kinds of formats, and it's tailored based on the need. So the questionnaire versus the ePro app. We also have IVR to be able to call in and select two for the number of rescue medication tablets that you took that day. And then, of course, eSource, which is often tablet-based. We're able to support all different application types, as well as we can provide the devices. So that's a key part as well, especially when we're talking about accessibility. A subject or patient might not have the required physical tools or devices, and that's something that can be provided as part of a full kit, and of course accounted digitally with Infusion. And of course, the other piece is the support. We don't want to be adding additional burden to the site, so that's something that the customer care team takes on. Here you can see some examples of reminders or push notifications. So here it's a reminder to take the medication, as well as a reminder that there has been a dose adjustment. From there, when there is that reminder, then the subject would be recording or confirming. So I took my dose, I did not take my dose. And of course, based on the confirmation or lack of confirmation, then there can be actions taken by the site and or flags to the monitor as well. Our third study challenge, as we noted, is study oversight. We're talking about remote working with the site, the monitors, even the patient interactions. And how do you have that? How can you get that information visible when we're talking about looking at metrics, dashboards, reporting? So again, of course, the solution is through technology and in this case, real-time reporting and dashboards. So what this does is it allows you to see those metrics early on and monitor and track your KRIs, and that all falls under that study oversight bucket. And it's really critical for the study integrity to be able to have visibility and catch anything early on, especially when you have that minimal contact between the patients and the clinic. The other piece is that who has access to that? And it's really key that there's the awareness to all of the team members, including, of course, at the sponsor, as well as CROs, vendors, and the sites. When we're talking about that fusion reporting, it's really instant access to your data, that real-time knowledge, the visibility to any trending, and being able to utilize the corresponding data analysis tools. Everything is really available just at a couple of clicks, and it really gives you that overall study control. Here you can see some different ways that you can visualize your key study metrics, monitoring enrollment progress, and tracking how you're approaching or how close those key milestones are. Another one that we can't get away with, of course, is IP compliance and being able to track and reach out and retrain the patients as required. Deviations, another one tied to that managing of risk, being able to track those, whether it's based on subjects completing their scheduled questionnaires outside of the standard visit schedule, or anything that's noted or completed during those home health care visits. Okay, so how do we approach this specifically for direct-to-patient studies, and how is our approach different? So Fusion acts as your connected hub. This is where all of your study data is coming together, is captured, and everything is available through that single logon. So just like we touched on today, we have our inventory, which is through our CTM tracking. We have also our eligibility checks through the randomization IWRS. We have all of our ePro activities there. And of course, that comes together with all of the additional modules, such as our labs. And with all of those modules, then you really have the flexibility to configure it the way that you need it for your study. So you can use just selected modules, you can do EDC plus those selected modules, or you can take full advantage and use the full Fusion suite. Along with the ability to provide the different technology pieces, we also, of course, have the services to support. That includes everything from biostats, data analytics, and of course, our clinical services. How do we do this differently? So as we noted, this is a single sign-on. This is to all of your data. You have your centralized dashboards and your reporting that comes with it. And really the theme is focused on the data and focus on the patient and the sites to decrease burden wherever we can, whether it's the subjects and their travel, as well as the sites making sure that they have all of that information readily available to them, and taking off some of the burden through our customer care support. So we talked about the technology and the data, but it always comes back to the team. And something that really allows us to stand out is that relentless commitment to study success. This is a collaborative effort, and we work together with all of the stakeholders, including making sure that those patients have the support that they need. So just want to say thank you for listening in today and looking forward to your questions. And of course, if you do have any further questions, please reach out to request a demo, and you can see our email here to do so. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today to talk all about direct-to-patient and remote trials. So I can see some questions that have already come through, but we are going to start today off with some polls. So some of you have already been actively responding, so that's wonderful. But for the rest of you, there is a poll button along the bottom of your screen. So if you can just take a quick look and a quick vote. And there are 2 polls, and we're going to do a little bit of a comparison on those. So just for everyone, we have 2 questions, and we're looking at what is your biggest challenge for remote trials? The other aspect is what is the biggest challenge for trials in general, so remote as well as those that are in clinic. And in both cases, we have 4 different options: recruitment and retention, patient compliance, IP management and logistics, as well as study oversight. So let's take a look at our first set of results, which is for our remote trials. So here we can see that IP management and logistics is definitely a top vote, about 45%. And then our next one is patient compliance, which is 27%, and then we have following there recruitment and retention and study oversight. So our definitely by a landslide, our main one is the IP management and logistics for remote trials. And then for our second poll here, I'm just going to look at what we have for our options in general. Okay, I think we're gonna focus here on the remote trials. It seems like the general one is just popping up there. So yes, so just taking that back. So looking at and patient compliance. This is real-time data. So patient compliance is kind of bumped up there as well. So let's take a moment to talk through that. So when we're looking at kind of patient compliance and IP management and logistics, it makes sense that those are the top ones, as some of the technology that we talked about today is really focused on kind of building and being able to not replace, but allow for other ways to interact with the patients, as well as managing the challenges for IP. And I would say that is also a challenge when it comes to just trials in general as well. The logistics of IP can often be an oversight or an after, something that's discussed after the main portions of the study are discussed, but especially from the randomization and trial supply management side, I would argue to say that's one of those essential ones to start talking about early, thinking strategically, as that can have impacts, especially relating to, can you start your study if your inventory is not yet available and you haven't discussed all of those details. The other aspect of patient compliance, of course, you can utilize some of these tools regardless of if it's remote or just a study in general. We can use a lot of these technologies to improve. Okay, so let's move on to our first official question. So how do you ensure patient end users are properly supported? So when we're talking about the patient end user, so of course in a traditional study, then from the technology standpoint, then you're looking at more focus on the site. But of course the patient end user, and like we said, patient compliance is one of those challenges. So the big challenge with those remote visits is definitely the increased use of technology, and you really need to have that technical support. So when we're looking at the technical support, we don't want it to fall just on the sites. That's something that it's really important to have that extra support. So we have our 24/7 customer care. The support is multilingual. And then in addition to that live support, we also have our user-friendly manuals. And that's included in the ePro kits that are provided as part of those study kits. So that's an essential part, being able to allow them to use those and use that at their own pace, as well as that live support. Another piece, just still talking about patient and users, is that it's also tailoring the configuration. So when we're looking at how to configure, is there certain ways that we can tailor the notifications? Of course, site time zones are very important, and that I would say is that basic minimum, but also how much flexibility do you want to have in the notifications to tailor around specific dosing times based on what their schedule is? Is there certain dosing times, like an end of day dose, where, well, you don't want a notification to remind them after that dose that they need to complete a fasting phase, or their fasting phase is complete, because then they might be asleep and it might interrupt their sleep. So there's, it's looking at it holistically. We still want to make sure the site has the support that they need, but when it comes to the patients, we want to make sure it's user-friendly, and we can tailor wherever we can. Our next question is for the direct-to-patient model, is it right for every study? So I'm going to cheat a little bit with this one, because when you're talking about the direct-to-patient module, the direct-to-patient model, then you can really focus on kind of partial remote activities. So basically any study can benefit from specifically those the patient-reported outcomes, doing those digitally, because it means that there's that easy access, and just looking at kind of what method is best. So is it something that should be on the tablet? Is it something that should be on via an app? Is it something that should just be a call-in? It should be IWRS. It's really kind of choosing what the best delivery model is for that. And it's all tailored based on the types of questions that are part of those key assessments for the study. So our next question here is, are there any challenges with using a direct-to-patient model? So we talked about the challenges just in general, but I would say, or the technology pieces, but I would say planning and monitoring are really those key pieces. And that's because it may take some extra upfront planning when it comes to the logistics and the design phase, especially when we're talking about direct-to-patient shipments. We need to make sure we're asking the right questions, mapping out those responsibility, the key stakeholders, and identifying the metrics. And then moving forward after that planning, that monitoring of the metrics. A big thing is that when you have that that decreased face-to-face interaction, less direct interaction, then we need to have, and we have more time really to focus on the data. So this really comes back to kind of challenges noted in any study, remote or in clinic, which is being able to have access to your data and being able to make decisions based on that actionable data. So when you're talking about a unified platform, then that's what's going to really help with that direct-to-patient model. That's going to bring all of your data together, the source data entry from the home healthcare nurses, the patient-reported outcomes directly coming from the patients, of course. Then there's less time kind of piecing all of the data together and pulling it together, because that's what the technology is doing. The technology is doing that work for you. And so it also includes that layer of not only giving you the data, access to it, it's also highlighting, like I said before, that actionable data so you can act faster. If there's a delayed shipment, if there's incomplete questionnaire, so there's some of the questionnaire that's still pending, maybe an abnormal lab value, then that can be visualized and acted on in real time. And so that's something, as it just coming back to that with the challenges there. And actually, one thing I'd like to go back to actually our earlier question about, is that model right for every study? And one aspect is really, how do you decide? So really looking at the benefits, the risks, what assessments are being conducted, again, going back to what kind of questionnaires. Are there certain evaluations that must be done in person? Is there a vendor with personnel that are region specific and they're qualified to carry those out? All of that comes into that consideration as well. You're not just doing it to be remote, you're also trying to streamline the process as a whole. If that's going to become much more of a burden than just having it at that single location, then that's part of your decision as well. Okay, just seeing if there's any other questions there. And if not, we can go back a little bit to our biggest challenges and our polls. I'm just going to see if we have our results for our second poll there. And I do. So as we noted earlier, for our results for the remote trials, and this is the final answer, the patient compliance and IP management. And then for the trials in general, it was noted as recruitment and IP management. So we can't really get away from that IP management. It's important to detail out and identify those key stakeholders and streamline that process wherever possible. And that's something that the technology is there for, but it's also important to have the right team behind that as well. So we're always happy to discuss any other questions that might pop up later, especially for those of you watching not in real time. So looking forward to any questions and happy to discuss from there. So thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of your day.